Well, that orb over there was the soul orb given to that guy by the Emperor of the Mer people. When the blood of a good soul touches the orb, it emits light. However, when the blood of an evil soul touches the orb, it turns black. So if that woman in front of them was really the witch and the messenger sent by the founder, they should accept this orb test. After all, the orb would prove everything. And, for those who didn't understand, it's like a lie detector for the paladin, and the detective saint's vision is similar but not the same. After all, the name is different, right? The ghost commented that it's quite simple and a very interesting item, and the messenger from the founder agreed with him and accepted to take the test. And since he accepted, he couldn't back out, right? So, they began by verifying the soul of Preta, and after making a small cut on her hand, the blue guy from the Mer people dropped her blood on the orb, and as we expected, it turned black because her name is Preta. I guess someone understood, right? If not, it's all good. Since the orb turned very black, everyone there started wondering about what evil deeds and murders that girl had committed, or if she was a cursed being. They had no doubts, right? She was the Demon King, and the people there hated her so much that she got a simple slap, but now it was the self-proclaimed messenger of the founder's turn. And so the blue guy did the same procedure again. When the drop of blood touched the orb, the thing started to shine as bright as day, I think, but it was really bright. No one there understood what was happening, not even the blue guy, who was asking what kind of soul the protagonist had or how many lives he saved, because the protagonist was the light itself. This confused one of the paladins in the group because he didn't see any light. However, the blue guy started to side with the protagonist after he said that, declaring that's why he didn't speak with inferior humans, because no one with a soul like the protagonists would lie to them. The protagonist wasn't just the founder's messenger, he was probably the goddess's apostle. Taking advantage of this lie, the protagonist declared himself to be the apostle, right? It's strange though because the humans weren't seeing that light the blue guy was talking about, and the commander up there had seen it. They began questioning where he came from because he had the sword the emperor had used before. Anyway, the leader of the paladins declared that he didn't know. Let's say the protagonist is indeed the founder's emissary and the light itself. They wanted to know why he was blocking their way, or if everyone had forgotten that they had to burn that place because the Pope was not only worried about the witch, but also her followers. Thus, they couldn't let them escape divine punishment. If the protagonist was indeed the apostle of the goddess, he should lead the way to apply divine punishment. And this leading the way thing, the protagonist could use this to his advantage. After all, the best lies are made of 90% truth and 10% lie. And so the protagonist began telling the knights to be careful with what they were saying because it wasn't up to them to decide how divine punishment should be applied. As an apostle, it was his duty to decide that. He had already gathered all the evil and divine punishment had already been applied. So he would show them. Thus, the protagonist used his overpowered ability to summon 100 ghosts. Seeing everything in front of them, the paladins were totally shocked. Then the protagonist began to declare, "It is my duty. See how this witch can be the only evil in this world. Each of these ghosts I've gathered are wrongdoers with actions as bad as the witches. The goddess gave me an order to punish all the evil that corrupts the world in her name. My mission is to subjugate all the evil in the world and take all demons to hell. What you see now is my hell." My brother, the guy lies so well, right? If I knew the protagonist in real life and he said good morning to me on the street, I would look up at the sky 3 times to make sure it's really clear, just because I don't know him. The blue guy ended up falling for his talk, right? Even if I tried to shout at him, he wouldn't understand. He was completely moved because the goddess's apostle was doing all this alone without them knowing. And the protagonist agreed, saying it was very painful. Then the blue guy started asking how, being a mere human, he managed to go through this hell alone. And once again, the protagonist declares, "This is my duty, so there's no more need for you to punish the witch or her souls or her minions. They will suffer forever in my shadow. I am their hell." The protagonist is turning into a coach, huh? After 40-90 deaths, the guy knows a lot. And the protagonist was lying so much that even the ghost was giving up on being his master because, as his instructor in part, he was just a child and couldn't handle a scoundrel like the protagonist. However, the protagonist responded, "What do you mean, master? I still have much to learn from your wicked personality." Returning to the conversation with the people there, the protagonist declared that it was the will of the goddess, or rather her divine retribution. The paladin, scared to death still by those demons the protagonist had invoked, questioned whether those demons were really trapped because if they escaped to the world, the damage would be immense. And since he was so scared, the protagonist was going to run a test for him. So he just summoned a ghost and used the part of his ability to recover memories. And whom do you think he summoned? That's right, that accursed one? No, that blessed one used by the Flame Emperor's demonic powers. He started spewing a bunch of nonsense to the protagonist, saying he didn't want to come back, that he would have been happier if the protagonist had boiled him in water. Then he started cursing and condemning the protagonist to his 13th generation. He began explaining to the paladins up front that the wrongdoer before them had committed acts as evil as the witches. In fact, he was on a much worse scale because the witch was born a monster, and that man had committed atrocious crimes despite being human. And to show he was properly imprisoned, the protagonist made the Flame Emperor dance. He performed ballet, samba, and that Scottish dance that resembles Faux. Faced with that, the protagonist asked if they were still worried. Kneeling, their leader then asked the protagonist his name, and he declared it was Gongja. Following their leader's example, the others began to kneel, declaring they would do whatever the protagonist said. Thus, the protagonist managed to complete the stage on normal mode and also completed the secret mission, Hero of the Frozen World. He concluded the boss stage, and since the protagonist had completed the floor, of course, he was going to receive the rewards, right? As the calculations were made, the tower notified that the rewards would be given within 24 hours after entering the 21st floor. The ghost was saying the protagonist was crazy because he completed the floor in his own way, and the protagonist responded that it didn't matter if he was crazy or not because he completed all floors up to the 20th the way he wanted, and no hunter died in the process. Additionally, no one from the Empire or continent died, and in the end, he even managed to save that little one there completed it alone, even if he didn't do anything, because the fire and the disappearance of the village were also a type of conclusion. After all, as long as there's a proper conclusion, the tower doesn't care if it's a happy ending or not. Otherwise, Yosova, the Flame Emperor, wouldn't have been able to reach the 40th floor. So that world is not predetermined by the tower, and it's not an end that appeared because there was no other choice. Just today, the rains won't fall from the skies and the flames won't lick the ground because that is the ending the protagonist chose. Even if it's cool and all, that ending the protagonist made, with that guy dancing over there, was part of the ending he wanted. And apparently, yes, because it was very beautiful to the protagonist. And since the protagonist had completed the 20th floor, of course, the tower would announce it to everyone, right? The protagonist was already kind of pissed because there was no internet there, and the ghost questioned why the protagonist was so mad since he hadn't said he didn't care about others' responses. Boldly, the protagonist asked when he had said that. According to the ghost, it was when the protagonist had said he would get recognition from the Black Witch, the Holy Sword, and the other guildmasters. Based on this, the protagonist responded that the more, the better, because he would get recognition from them all. So that guy kept arguing for a while. Suddenly, to stop all this talk, the Black Witch jumped on the protagonist, declaring that she knew the protagonist was truly crazy because, for a rookie who hadn't even turned 20, he was extremely wild. I think the old man even wanted to congratulate the protagonist, but he had to maintain his cold and calculative demeanor. The Black Witch continued, saying everyone in the tower was going crazy because of the protagonist. She knew this because she had quickly gone to the first floor and took all those pictures. In short, she was showing something about the protagonist. He completed the 14th floor and was called the King of Death and various other titles. In the end, everything was about the protagonist. Even in the outside world, this was making waves. But upon seeing all of those screenshots on her phone, the protagonist asked the Black Witch if she had taken all those pictures herself, and she replied yes. This kind of confused the protagonist because it meant that to show the articles others were writing about him, she had teleported to the first floor, looked up all those articles, and eventually took photos of each one of them. She confirmed that indeed. This took the protagonist by surprise because she's ranked second among the hunters and the highest authority figure in the tower. Simply, she took screenshots to show others. Oh, and she also advised the protagonist not to read the comments since there would be a bunch of people envious of him because the protagonist achieved all those feats without any deaths. Hearing this, the protagonist started to consider her an angel, which was almost pitiful, according to the ghost. He already called others angels just because they gave him advice, but this time it was even worse as he started calling her a goddess. Anyway, putting the protagonist's madness aside, the Black Witch showed a very interesting piece of information. The protagonist was on the front page of the newspaper, ranked third among the hunters. This was the first time in the tower's history that someone had gone from an unranked position to simply the third place. The Black Witch congratulated the protagonist because now he also represented all the hunters. She advised him to pay more attention to his actions from now on, and since he had joined all 5 major guilds, even as an independent, being ranked third meant he should have a title equivalent to a guild master. It didn't make sense for someone ranked third to be a mere guild member. So the protagonist started thinking about this whole guild master thing. However, the Black Witch mentioned that if the protagonist didn't want that, he could be a lone wolf like the old man. Moving on from this topic, she asked who those people were. The protagonist explained that they were soldiers he gathered from all over the continent. It was a long story, but he explained that after defeating the Demon King, there was an event where these NPCs invaded the 20th floor. After deceiving them or using an ability and an item effect, they believed the protagonist was the founder's emissary. People started praising the protagonist because he was very good at lying. Due to this lie, he completed the floors without a drop of bloodshed, except for the drop he put on the orb. The Black Witch was very happy because thanks to him, they could negotiate with that continent too, meaning they wouldn't have to make bad trades with those old guys from the outside world who constantly abused and charged exorbitant prices for food. The old man began conversing with her, discussing how food was too expensive. The protagonist reflected that when he first met the Black Witch, he thought she was not a friendly person. However, the way she treated him now meant they were closer, right? With that, the protagonist asked the Black Witch if she was saying the hunters would start negotiating with that continent. She confirmed that too. The protagonist commented that he would lend his name to the cause since, in that world, he was the founder's emissary and the goddess's apostle. Given that he was all that, it would be easier to negotiate. But as they say, there's no free lunch, and the Black Witch asked what he wanted in return. The protagonist replied that he wanted the 20th floor, not just a part of it, he wanted all of it. He wanted all the lands on that floor. In exchange, he wouldn't take anything for completing floors 11 to 19. She could then divide the negotiation profits with the continent and the other hunters as well. The Black Witch responded that it was an extraordinary offer, but she couldn't decide that alone. However, she asked if he really wanted that place because, in her view, it wasn't that valuable and he probably wouldn't make much money from it. The protagonist replied that he liked properties more than money. With that answer, she said she would discuss it with the other guildmasters and get back to him. With this matter resolved, there was something she wanted to ask him for a while. What the heck was that little guy dancing there? The protagonist simply replied that she should pretend she didn't see anything. Sometime later, they returned to the city on the first floor. The Black Witch asked the protagonist if there was any problem with meeting at the cafe they had visited before, and he agreed. At this moment, the protagonist began to reflect that, for everyone else, only 5 days had passed. But for him, it was the first time he was back there in several hundred days. It only just hit him that he had completed the floor. The Black Witch commented that it wasn't the time for the protagonist to be surprised, yet because, as she had said, everyone in the tower was going crazy over him. So he should be prepared. When he stepped out, the place was crowded with journalists waiting for him. Naturally, they were all shouting the name of the King of Death as the 3 exited the teleportation door. The journalists were full of questions, all focused on none other than the King of Death. They asked all sorts of things, but the one that stood out the most was people asking about the nature of his relationship with the Black Witch. As he was about to answer, the Black Witch declared for him not to say anything, because he didn't have experience dealing with the press, right? So he could either remain mysterious or become a popular star. It's kind of a concept thing. Once you establish it, it's very difficult to change. That's why he needed to decide now. Popular stars are like movie celebrities. They always would need to keep creating new social media accounts, and he would also need a secretary for image management. If he wanted, the Black Dragon Guild would handle this workload and his security. Since he didn't like crowds, the old man was already heading out. So the protagonist asked what would happen if he chose the mysterious concept. The Black Witch replied that it was quite simple. He should maintain a good, expressionless face and avoid any activity on social media. Appearances in magazines and broadcasts were also prohibited, even private broadcasts. At most, he could have 2 interviews per year with reporters she approved of. Listening to this, it would be easy, right? But the protagonist didn't know how hard it was because attention is a kind of addictive drug. Just 10 people paying attention to someone makes them happy. When someone reaches the level the protagonist is at now, anything he says will generate reactions from tens of thousands of people. Not many can resist this drug, and of course it gives a good feeling. However, this would depend on the protagonist. He replied that he just wanted recognition. And though he didn't know much about receiving attention is different from receiving recognition. To get the attention of those around him was already enough, be they thousands or millions. What he wanted from others in the world was not attention but recognition. Hearing this, the Black Witch declared she liked the way the protagonist was. In response, he asked how to have a good expressionless face. She revealed a secret: he should recall some truly bad memories. For example, in her case, when she was in the outside world, her father died in a civil war. She was running away with her father, and the soldiers were probably after them. Her father shouted at her to keep going without looking back, and she did that. She continued running, but she heard gunshots. It wasn't that she hated fleeing because at that time she was just a child. But why didn't she look back? It was something so easy to do. That was her secret because just remembering it allows her to create expressionless features. She asked if the protagonist had 1 or 2 memories like that, and looking at him, she realized he apparently did. Sometime later, the protagonist arrived at that cafe, and the first to greet him was none other than the Inquisitor. Again, he was praising the protagonist, but this time for completing 10 floors in 5 days, something that had never happened before. He calls the protagonist the King of Death from now on. The paladin even apologized because she thought the 3 of them would die trying to climb all those floors alone, but in the end, they succeeded. So she asked if they had any secret method for this. The protagonist replied that it was just to live a good life, which was a pretty impossible piece of advice, right? Anyway, the protagonist was very happy to see them after so long, though he forgot that for him, it had only been 5 days. What did he mean by so long? They also mentioned that the NPCs started walking around out of nowhere, and to make matters worse, they thought they were invaders trying to attack the Imperial Palace. Because of this, they summoned the Empire's knights and elite soldiers to try and capture them. Viper declared that they managed to get out of that situation because of the Inquisitor. They first surrendered and then escaped from prison. Then, they found a secret path under the dungeons. The Inquisitor commented that it was like going back to his childhood days because he was captured by the Bulgarian mafia when he was just a child. He started sharing a bunch of crazy stories about underground escapes and other things. It was interesting that they had incredible lives in the outside world. For example, the Countess was born in a poor village in India. Viper's parents were gang leaders, and the Paladin faced hardships in Venezuela. To summarize, for those who didn't understand yet, all of them were practically nobodies in the outside world. The Paladin felt a bit embarrassed because it wasn't something to be talking about there. But putting that idea aside, it meant that even the King of Death was now part of them. The Black Witch began to explain, because they probably didn't know, that the protagonist made crucial contributions to completing the tower. They didn't lose a single hunter in this raid, even on the 11th floor where many hunters fought together. So, she wanted to make the protagonist the hero of the tower who would represent all hunters. You might be wondering why they didn't do that with the others first. The Countess revealed much of her wealth, the Inquisitor killed many people, the Paladin hated receiving attention from others, and Viper was very ugly. As everyone knows, the old man couldn't be the hero because he loved the sword and nothing else, except for his grandchildren. And the Black Witch couldn't be the hero either because she always acted behind the scenes, resolving things quietly. On the other hand, the public had no impression of the protagonist. The Inquisitor agreed because they had been in the tower for a long time, so their image had really lost its strength, and this was affecting their image in the outside world. However, for this, they had the protagonist. They could take several photos of him and send them to a bunch of magazines. The Inquisitor asked the protagonist if he was seeing anyone at the moment, to which he replied that he wasn't, and this was good to avoid any scandals, for now at least. Then they started creating a lot of images of the protagonist, kind of fleshing out his mysterious concept. Since he wasn't dating anyone, this was bad. Why? Because they needed a scandal for the protagonist's image to rise. So is this how the minds of famous people work? I don't know, I'm not from the tower, right? Then they started figuring out what to do. Use his achievement of defeating several floors in 5 days, or make some anonymous donations to orphanages. A bunch of blah 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 later, and the protagonist was getting shocked. He asked the Black Witch why he had chosen a mysterious concept if he didn't think he'd need something like a designer. The Black Witch declared it was just for today because the whole world wanted to know who he was. So they would take only one photo and show it to everyone. The protagonist was in for it in the end, leading to makeup and a lot of posing for pictures. Because of these hasty developments, the protagonist was more lost than an olive in a toothless mouth. But people were still making up more stuff for him to do. Seeing the whole situation, who would take advantage of it but the ghost? He started laughing uncontrollably. Getting tired of it, the protagonist said he wouldn't do anything more because the hunter's job is to climb the tower properly. Who cares about image, media, and photo shoots? Almost certainly, because of these useless matters, they occupied their minds and couldn't get past the 10th floor. People were shocked by all the protagonist's chatter, but they ignored it, saying he gave a great speech. The magazine headline this time would be, "The Hunter Who Climbed the Tower." The protagonist continued saying he just came to talk about the 20th floor, not these photo shoots. Then they added one more thing. The greedy King of Death declares that the rights from the 11th to the 19th floor should be distributed among hunters. He is content with just completing the tower. They began making up even more headlines for the protagonist, and the old man even advised him to give up because this happened to him when he became the top one. In simpler words, this was something they wanted to showcase to the outside world, as if to say, we are living a glamorous life too. It was almost like an inferiority complex because they abandoned everything in the outside world and came to the tower, right? Then why they still had this mindset? That's why the old man told the protagonist he should leave because if he stayed, it would never end. The protagonist agreed and the old man fled from there. Before leaving, the Black Witch shouted to the protagonist that they would have a press conference the next day, so he should return as early as possible. Sometime later, the protagonist climbed with the old man to a rooftop in the city where there was a soldier guarding the area. The old man asked the soldier to give them a few minutes to talk alone. Noticing who was there, the soldier realized he was in the presence of the King of Death and was, of course, very excited. He didn't waste the opportunity to ask for an autograph from the first rank of the tower and even from the protagonist, which was unexpected since the soldier had never done that before. The protagonist wrote his name, or rather his title, right under the holy swords. The soldier left very happy, saying it would be his family's inheritance. And we'll see it in the next episode. Remember to subscribe and leave a like.